Welcome to the Exploring Unschooling podcast. I'm Pam Laricchia, longtime unschooling mom and author. Join me and my wonderful guests for interviews, information, and inspiration about unschooling and living joyfully with your family. You can find the episode show notes, your free introductory ebook, What is Unschooling, and lots more information at livingjoyfully.ca. And here's the show. Hello, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia, and this is episode number 61 of the podcast. It's the 1st of March, 2017, as I record this intro. And this week, the book chat is back. In this episode, Emma Marie Forde and I chat about David Howe's book, Attachment Across the Lifecourse, a brief introduction, through the lens of unschooling, of course. As so many other unschooling parents have found over the years, I found the strong and connected relationships that we develop with our children through creating a solid unschooling home to be the most valuable outcome in the end. And I had no idea that that would be the case when we first started out. So often we start our unschooling journey looking for the learning and focused on the learning. But along the way, we discover that if we focus on the relationships, on joy and engagement and connection, learning inevitably follows. That was a perspective that I brought to the book, and I was really curious to see how the research of attachment theory would mesh with that experience. Interestingly, Emma comes at it from the other way around. Before having children, attachment theory played an important role in her work as a clinical psychologist. She found attachment theory a useful way of thinking about relationships between children and their carers. And she was able to observe the kinds of relationships and environments in which children could thrive, which tended to be the intimate relationships between parent and child, usually at home. That was the perspective she brought with her when she became a parent and to her family's eventual choice to unschool. I really enjoyed the book and found that it meshed well with my experience with my own children, as well as with other adults and children that I've interacted with over the years. I love that the author talks about how our attachment patterns play out and even change over the course of our lives. So often we think of attachment only in terms of attachment parenting. And even then, usually only in the early years, typically until they hit school age. It's so much more. I hope you find my chat with Emma as fascinating as I did. A couple of things before we get there, though. I wanted to follow up a bit from a question we answered on the Q&A episode last week. It was question 1, the listener with the younger sister struggling to feel good about herself. She commented on the episode post, and I thought I'd share it with you to close the loop a bit. She wrote, "Hi, Pam, Ann, and Anna. This is the asker of question 1. I just wanted to say thank you so much for your wisdom. I must have listened to your answers 4 times already, and each time a different tidbit reveals something new, and everything makes more and more sense. I've had so many revelations, I don't think I could write them all here. You all really saw through to what I was struggling with in that question and provided the ideas I needed to move through it. It's so interesting how being exposed to clearer ways of thinking about the things you've turned around in your mind for so long gradually changes your entire perspective. I'm so grateful for this because you were right. I had been feeling so much struggle, and having a new focus allows me to see so much more clearly. Reframing my feelings of struggling upstream to a new focus of being present, looking for opportunities to see the shine that is already there, finding ways to provide joy, and being a sounding board. I especially like the imagery of being the light at the end of the tunnel. That was very helpful. Has really changed how I felt and allowed me to see all of the possibilities of how I can help over the past few days. It really helped me understand more about what keeping an open energy means and how much that can help. I imagine I'll revisit your answers at many stages as I grow in experience and understanding and find something new every time. I knew I had to leave a comment as the 3 of you have really empowered me by giving me away the tools to truly help my sister and others. And now I feel closer to being the person I've always felt I wanted to be. I can't express enough what a difference you've made by answering my question. Thank you so much." Well, thanks very much for sharing, asker of question 1. It's great to know that you found our thoughts helpful and fun to hear a bit about how you're processing things and incorporating them moving forward. So cool. And that's one of the things that I love so much about life. seeing how my perspective on things changes over time, how I see new connections and learn new things as I revisit old thoughts and ideas with fresh eyes. So best wishes to you and your sister and your family. And thanks so much to everyone who have chosen to support the show on Patreon. I deeply appreciate all my patrons. You guys inspire me. And I love that you're helping me share unschooling information with anyone who wants to explore this wonderful lifestyle with their family. And if you'd like to support the show, even for as little as $1 a month, check out the Exploring Unschooling page at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/exploring unschooling. And this week's quote is, of course, from David Howe. He writes, "Intimate attachments to other human beings are the hub around which a person's life revolves, not only when he is an infant or toddler or a child, but throughout his adolescence and his years of maturity as well, and on into old age. From these intimate attachments, a person draws his strength and enjoyment in life, and, through what he contributes, he gives strength and enjoyment to others. These are matters about which current science and traditional wisdom are one." I love his phrase, intimate attachments. This is not about gathering the most friends, and it's not about favoring extroverts over introverts. These intimate attachments may be one or two close family members or friends. The hub around which our lives revolve does not need to be large to be meaningful and enjoyable. I also love that while the attachment parenting perspective is independent of the unschooling perspective, both have found that secure, connected relationships lie at the root of day-to-day living that thrives. I think that's beautiful. And with that, let's get on to that book chat with Emma. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Laricchia from livingjoyfully.ca, and today I'm here with Emma Marie Forde. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Pam.
It's so nice to have you back for another book chat.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
It should be really fun. This time, we are going to talk about the book Attachment Across the Lifecourse by David Howe, and you're going to start us off, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'll just start by saying a bit about David Howe. He's an emeritus professor of social work, and he began his career working as a social worker and a childcare officer. And then later he worked as a university researcher and teacher at the University of East Anglia. And he retired in 2010, but he continues to write and lecture internationally. So today I was thinking that I was going to start by taking a quote from chapter 1, which highlights the importance of relationships and attachment theory, and how it attempts to explain and explore these throughout the life cycle. So this is from chapter 1. Intimate attachments to other human beings are the hub around which a person's life revolves, not only when he is an infant or toddler or a child, but throughout his adolescence and his years of maturity as well, and on into old age. From these intimate attachments, a person draws his strength and enjoyment in life, and through what he contributes, he gives strength and enjoyment to others. These are matters about which current science and traditional wisdom are one. So I wanted to start off by sort of just giving some background to my own personal interest in attachment theory. And I've had a long-standing interest in attachment theory as part of my work as a clinical psychologist. And before having children, attachment theory played an important role in my clinical work in various settings that I worked with children and families. And I was also involved in observing the interactions between children and their families on a weekly basis over a 3-year period while I was taking an Tavistock infant observation course. And I really found the course was invaluable in terms of learning more deeply about children's relational development. And I found attachment theory was a useful way of thinking about relationships between children and their carers. And I was able to observe the kinds of relationships and environments in which children could thrive. And I found that these tended to be the intimate relationships between the parent and child, which were usually at home, where it was possible to provide more individualised and responsive care, and also where parents themselves tended to feel more nurtured and supported. So I was really interested in chatting to Pam about this book because I feel that living in an unschooling lifestyle, the quality of relationships that we have with our children is so important, because the quality of our relationships really determines how our children feel about themselves and whether they feel safe, secure and confident to play, and also whether they feel they can explore the world around them. Really, our relationships with our children creates the basic foundation on which our child's emotional and mental well-being develops, and this is what makes it possible for, in my opinion, for unschooling to take place. So for me, understanding more about attachment and attachment theory has been so helpful to me in terms of thinking about the relationships that I've been able to nurture with my own children and continue to do so.
Yeah, and I love the suggestion. Thanks for bringing the book up when we were talking about books that we'd like to cover, because, yeah, I mean, that's something that we've found so many times over the years, right? That the relationship is foundational. So it was really interesting to me to read more about the research and the attachment theory in this area. So that was very cool.
And it's, I mean, really, the attachment side of things, it's the reason why we actually are unschooling, because the attachment, the unschooling lifestyle has enabled us to sort of facilitate my relationship with my girls and to sort of continue breastfeeding and being with them, sort of spending time with them. And I feel that we couldn't have really done that if they'd have gone to a mainstream school. Well, not in the same way anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'll go on. Shall I say a bit more about the book?
Yeah.
It's the book's divided into three main parts, and it aims to provide an introduction to the origins and development of attachment theory, and it explores how attachment has been sort of conceptualized and the role it plays in our lives, not only during the early years but throughout the lifespan into older age. Part one of the book looks at the key conceptual components of modern attachment theory. So it looks at things like attachment behaviour, caregiving, safe havens and secure bases, emotional co-regulation and internal working models which we develop, and also our capacity for meta-thinking and sort of self-reflection, which in terms of attachment is conceptualised as mentalisation or mind-mindedness. So that's the sort of like the start. And then it moves into part two, which looks more at the four main attachment patterns, which are secure, avoidant, ambivalent, and disorganized. And it looks in quite a bit of depth, really, at how each of these patterns manifest at each stage in the life course. And then it moves into part three, where it looks in more depth at some of the unresolved questions and controversies around attachment theory. So, for example, it looks at the relative contributions of nature and nurture in relation to attachment styles. And it also looks at things like whether gender and disability have any, if attachment has any impact on those issues. And finally, it really looks at whether attachments, remain fixed or whether they're flexible and whether they can change across the life course. So it provides quite a comprehensive overview. Attachment across the life course, and it introduces us to the work of John Bowlby, who is really known as the father of attachment theory. Bowlby was a British psychoanalyst and psychiatrist, and for a considerable period of his career, he was head of the Child and Family Department at the Tavistock Clinic in London, which was 1946 to 1972, which was also the same clinic where I did my observation course that I enjoyed so much. And John Bowlby was actually responsible for the development of the British child psychotherapy training there. John retired in 1972, but he remained, he actively continued to research and write and continued his links with the Tavistock Clinic. And his theoretical and research papers. He published really over a period of 5 decades, all the way from 1930s right up to the 1980s. And his last book was published in 1990, which is only just a few months before his death. And since his death, his son, Richard Bowlby, has continued to extend and disseminate his father's work. So that's quite interesting. So his sort of legacy's continued in a number of ways. And that really takes me on to the applications of attachment theory, because as a result of John's original ideas in his work, it's made significant changes to public policy, including changes to things like hospital policy, so to enable children and parents to stay together, and also things like changes to social work practice. So it's recognised how serious it is to remove children from their family of origin, and this is really only done when it's felt there's no other alternative in cases where there's been abuse and neglect, and that there's no other realistic hope that the caregiver and child relationship can be rehabilitated. And also it's influenced in terms of, we realise that there's a preference actually for keeping children in family sort of environments and situations where they can have that kind of one-to-one nurturance that they wouldn't get if they were living in institutionalised care. Attachment theory is also, and research has also looked at the provision of care during the early years and influence programmes designed to improve parent-child relationships. And more recently in the UK, there's been a development of programmes that encourage attachment-aware schools. So his work sort of continuing to have an influence really on our everyday lives. And although although John originally conceptualized attachment theory, Mary Ainsworth, who was a developmental psychologist and researcher, she helped to develop and elaborate on the theory, drawing on sort of like quite rigorous research methods that she developed. And she found ways of empirically observing and assessing attachment relationships between children and their parents, which really took attachment theory to another level. And attachment theory has been it's been a catalyst for a huge amount of research, exploring all sort of aspects of attachment relationships throughout the life cycle. And so they've looked at adulthood, which the book does look into, and older adulthood. And people like Mary Main, Pat Crittenden, Judy and Alan Shaw, Alan Struth and Philip Shaver are just some of the key contributors to modern sort of developments in attachment theory. So it's continuing to sort of, it's very dynamic, and it's continuing to change. So that's quite exciting, really. So shall I go on a bit more? Or?
Yeah, no, I think now we'll get into a bit more of that's a great history. Now we can dive right into what attachment theory itself is.
Okay. So the book is really focusing on in the first chapter on what is attachment theory, and it can really be thought about as the science of relationships, and it draws on a diverse range of disciplines, including sort of evolutionary theory, ethology, psychology, psychoanalysis, systems theory, and cognitive science, and it brings all those diverse sort of strands together to form sort of quite a comprehensive theoretical outlook. And a basic definition of attachment, which is presented in the book, is so whenever a young human infant feels anxious, in danger or need, their attachment systems are activated. This triggers attachment behaviour, the goal of which is to recover proximity to the caregiver, where safety and comfort lie. Bowlby believed that there were innate care-seeking behaviours, attachment behaviours, which were basic and instinctual, and which all children possessed. So these were like signalling behaviours, such as things like protest, crying, clinging, and other displays of distress, which were all ways of signalling to a caregiver that they were needed and to get them to keep them close. And there are also sort of behaviours such as vocalising, cooing, burbling, sucking and smiling, and visual tracking, which we see even young babies doing quite often. Eye contact and following the caregiver and raising their arms, to be picked up, are all attempts to, keep and maintain a connection with the caregiver. From an evolutionary perspective, developing an attachment to a primary caregiver can be thought about as a behavioural strategy that's designed to keep us close and to keep us safe from danger, and ultimately to keep us alive. And from birth, babies are able to differentiate between different people. And I mean, one of the things that I always remember is that they can actually smell the difference between their mother's breast milk and another mother, like a different mother. So they can sort of differentiate from, very short time after they're born. And this enables them to go on to sort of form preferences to people and to develop attachment relationships with them. And so throughout that first year, they're really developing those sort of key relationships, and they do show quite a strong preference usually for one individual carer, although they can have more than one attachment, person. And there is some degree of flexibility in that, but they do tend to have one main carer. And just finally to say on this sort of section is that just as children have an attachment system and a way of sort of signalling for care, he believed parents also had a biological urge to care for children and to be able to comfort and keep children safe. And this is organised around, the goal of protecting, regulating and responding to the child, just in the same way that a child's attachment system is organised around being protected, regulated and responded to. So it's kind of like a reciprocal relationship where parent and infant are working together.
Yeah, I found that really fascinating, like that dance of how the parents and the child, even babies, really connected and intertwined, right? Mm-hmm. With caregiving systems being responsive and anyway, that was fascinating. So I'm going to move a little bit into part 2, and because that was another piece, the description. I love that. The part 2 is pretty big, as you mentioned, because he goes into the 4 different attachment patterns. And then he also looks at each one of them over the lifetime, right? So that you can see how it plays out. And it's super interesting. And, you can quite easily, think of friends and family and other people in your lives where you start to recognize some of the behaviors that he's talking about. Yeah. So that's so interesting. So what I wanted to do was just quickly go over the basic 4 attachment patterns for people, so that I think it really helps put those definitions of what he means into a bit more context. So hopefully that will help people understand a bit better. And remember, as Emma said, the goal of attachment behaviors is to bring their caregiver closer to them, right? Either physically or psychologically, even, to make sure that they're thinking about them and watching out for them, right? So that they feel safer. So the first pattern is secure attachment, and those develop when caregivers are available and responsive to their child at times of need. There's predictability in that, right? The parents are good at reading the baby's signals. And I loved his point. They're not perfect, but good. He says that even sensitive caregivers get it right only about 50% of the time. But what stands out is that they actively acknowledge and repair the disconnecting moments. So, if you can't respond immediately to your child's distress, but when you do, after you finish pouring your drink or your tea, you acknowledge that and say, oh, I was just getting this. I hope you can wait, or, just some sort of response to them, so that they know that you're coming, and they can wait. They learn to wait that little bit, or at least know that their response is coming. You know what I mean? He concludes that sensitively responsive parents who can tune into and see the world from their child's point of view are likely to have securely attached children. And in turn, that securely attached children are the most likely to develop emotional intelligence, good social skills, and robust mental skills. I loved when he talked about seeing the world from their child's point of view, because when we talk about unschooling, that is something that is really important. We talk a lot about trying to see things from their point of view, not even putting ourselves in their shoes, because that's still us looking at the situation from our perspective, right? With our experience. But getting into their point of view, knowing the experience that they personally have to attach and understand that situation. Avoidant attachment patterns arise when, from the child's point of view, their attachment behaviors cause their parent to become more distant and rejecting. So over time, the child gets the message that their parent doesn't actually enjoy being a parent, that they see caregiving as a chore more. They learn that their parent is actually most available to them when they are not distressed. So to achieve closeness with their parent, the baby learns that suppressing their attachment behaviors increases their chances to stay close to their caregiver. Ambivalent or anxious attachment patterns arise when parents' caregiving is inconsistent and unpredictable. So from the child's point of view, they can really find no reliable pattern between their attachment behaviors and the caregiver's response. So how can they more consistently try to bring their caregiver closer? The child begins to feel anxious because that caregiving feels arbitrary to them. So they tend to exaggerate their distress to provoke a response and get their caregiver's attention. And interestingly, I thought it was interesting, they also tend to resist being placated because in their experience, once they calm down, they're back at square one again, right? And the fourth pattern was disorganized. So the first three are organized enough that the child finds some way, some attachment behaviors that they can perform to increase the chance of their caregiver responding. But there are situations where the child finds it very difficult to find a pattern in their caregiver's response. And as such, they can't organize any kind of strategy of attachment behaviors to bring their caregiver to them in times of distress, hence why it's called disorganized. These parents feel unable to cope with the demands of parenting, and they may feel overwhelmed by their own fears and worries. So when the child feels fear, they have no reasonably consistent way to lessen it, and it stays with them. And David describes the implications as that fear dysregulates their emotions, overwhelms their cognitive capabilities or capacities, and damages their ability to develop an integrated state of mind with respect to all attachment behaviors. Now, when I was reading through that, and then he takes that and extends that right through older childhood, teens, adult and old age. So it's super interesting. But from those descriptions, for me, it was really interesting to see that at least with the three organized attachment patterns, they are shaped totally by that caregiving environment that the child finds himself in. So, there's really no wrong pattern from the child's perspective. Each pattern of those behaviors maximizes their caregiver response. And he spends time too talking about the parents themselves. These are patterns that they're playing out that they learned in relationships, right? So there's nothing wrong with these patterns per se, right? Because it's all about what the parent knows and how the parent's feeling in that reaction, in that environment, and what the child figures out to try and mesh with them as best they can so that they can feel safe when fear arises, right? Basically. So I thought that was really super interesting to see that these are relationship patterns, right? They're not necessarily negative at all. And it's the child figuring out the best way to get what they need. It was super cool. What did I have here? Another point. It was interesting to read in part 2, how these attachment patterns that we learn in early childhood are how we understand relationships and bring that understanding into our relationships over our lifetime, right? That's how we were talking about how the parents may have, say, an avoidant attachment that they develop through their childhood. And that's how they react in relationships when somebody, whether it's an adult or a child, has a need, to try to draw them in, to try to draw them closer. Mm-hmm. But it's also very cool that you can definitely shift your attachment patterns, but that takes intentional work. What jumped out at me when I was reading it is that when we look at this through the lens of unschooling, it's clear that secure attachments with our children are important for unschooling to thrive. And you talked about that a bit. And as I think about deschooling and how so many of us find that the bulk of the work of moving to unschooling is our own personal work to do. And, even in the Q&As, a lot of these questions are about, our relationships with our children. And I think often all that work that we're doing as we move to unschooling is so much about getting ourselves to the secure attachment patterns so that we can provide those secure caregiving behaviors for our children and develop that strong and connected relationship that really is foundational for unschooling. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And David describes this process of moving from an insecure to a secure attachment as earned secure attachment. So it's done by making sense of our own experiences and creating that coherent, reflective narrative. You were talking about mindedness, right? Like the meta cognitive thinking to understand our childhood experiences and how we got to the behavior patterns that we have now, and understanding the secure environment that we want to give to our children and how can we change our patterns. So much of the work, I think, for many of us is changing those attachment patterns. So I found that's super interesting.
I was just going to mention how important I think it is, that point you've made about the deschooling process and that work that we kind of do as parents. For me, I think part of that process started before I even had children. So I was kind of aware that as I was sort of learning about psychology from quite a young age. I was interested when I was at college, about 19. So I engaged in sort of therapy during those 10 years, sort of between 19 up to sort of, on and beyond when I went to have children when I was about 34. And I felt that during that process, I was sort of engaging in this sort of process of developing an insecure attachment by having a secure relationship with a therapist, someone that I could really trust, who I saw on a weekly basis, and who enabled me to really sort of like reflect on my own sort of childhood and life experiences, enabled me to sort of really make sense of them and to put them in context and to develop the narrative that they're talking about here. So I think that's another reason why I feel it kind of speaks intuitively to me, because I've experienced this in my own life, and for me it was transformatory. That it took me from being someone who did feel maybe more anxious and insecure and sort of uncertain about relationships to actually feeling that it was possible to have my own children. It kind of, I think part of doing the observation course also enabled, sort of demystified the process of having children, and I could really see what was involved in sort of nurturing those close relationships. So for me, I feel, part of that work was going on even before I even started to think about having children. And I know for some people they might sort of have children and then that kind of acts as a catalyst to start this work. So I think it just depends. But it's definitely something that I feel that you can do, and something that is really valuable for both, it's been valuable for me, and I think it's had an impact on my daughters. So that was just what I was going to respond to what you sort of said there.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love that. He talked about a therapist that can be like a transitional attachment figure, right?
Yeah.
To help feedback and a place where you can develop that more solid kind of relationship, right?
Yeah.
More kind of open the patterns of honesty, really, and analyzing, because so often when we're looking at the less secure attachments, so often it was because the parent didn't really understand what was going on, right?
Yeah.
Because maybe they had been avoidant all their life because that's what they had learned in their situation, right? Mm-hmm. So because they avoided it, they never really spent time thinking about it or thinking about other ways that you can be in relationship with people. So yeah, that's so interesting how both of those things came together for you, right?
Yeah, no, it's really been helpful to see that for me to know on an experiential level that it is possible to change your attachment patterns, that they're not fixed, which is something that he does go on to explore in the book, and I think it's really hopeful for both parents and children, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's something that I focus on, because I think it can be such a powerful way of bringing parents and children closer and also sort of making changes in your life. So, but yeah,
that's one of the things I love about on our Q&A questions and stuff is taking a situation and just try and come up with other ways to look at it, right? And that just helps people see that there really are different narratives that you can put onto a situation and different perspectives, and maybe try and bring the child's point of view into it more. So yeah, I find it all very fascinating.
Okay, shall I go on to the next bit then?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so yeah, no, I'm going into sort of like the next part for me was looking at how aspects of a secure caregiver role can provide sort of like a secure base, and thinking about how this fits with unschooling. So there was 4 main ideas really that I wanted to pick up on, which I feel the book looks at, which is directly relevant to our unschooling journeys. And the first one is the secure base, which is the idea that a parent can act as a sort of safe haven, and somewhere that someone that the child can depend on, and that they can feel confident to go out and explore the world with knowing that they've got that secure relationship there. They feel, sort of like they can be free to play. And David says, the more confident and secure children feel in the availability of a responsive attachment figure to be there for them at times of need, the more independent and playful they can be. Caregivers who provide a secure base allow their children to be autonomous, curious, and experimental. So for me, when children feel that their attachment and dependency needs are being taken care of by their caregiver, this enables them to sort of relax and be relatively free of anxiety, so that they can engage with the world and play and really learn about the world around them. And this for me really connects when I remember reading Sandra Dodd's work she talks about the unschooling nest, how important the environment is that we create, like in our lives around our children. So we recognise, like how important the quality of our relationships are, and how important the emotional climate of the home is, because this is just so important for unschooling to thrive and for our children to thrive. So something that just sort of jumps out at me. And in the book there's a quote here that I was going to share as well. It just says, when children feel relaxed and secure, they can enjoy the benefits of play, social interaction, discovering new things, learning, being busy and creative, and simply following their curiosity. They explore their environment. And however, when danger threatens, uncertainty arises, and anxiety is felt, or distress is experienced, the attachment system kicks back into play, and play and exploration immediately stop. So in fact, because fear and survival are so basic, activation of the attachment system generally means that other important behaviour systems, such as the exploratory, affiliative, sociable, And in things like cases of adults, sort of the sexual motivations, they're all deactivated when we feel anxious or afraid. And so that means that we're less likely to feel sort of playful or chatty or sexy. So we're probably just, our attachment figure in our life and our environment that we're in just plays such an important role in helping us to feel able to explore and to be curious. So I think what it is, you can't just take those things for granted. And when you're unschooling, you really need to think about the whole context. And I think that's what, the idea of the secure base sort of presents us with here.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that so fascinating. And I love when I see like the same ideas come up in very different contexts, because I remember reading about and understanding how important that safe, secure environment is when I was reading Finding Flow. The one by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. I finally learned how to pronounce his name, I think. It totally reminds me of the concept of flow, because in his book, he talks about how a safe environment is so important for anyone to be able to sink into the flow of their activity. And he describes it as the joy of complete engagement. And as you're talking about, that is where wonderful learning is found, when you're feeling so safe and secure that you don't need to kind of keep your eye on the environment, keep looking out for things, but you can just totally get into the moment, get into the flow, and just follow your curiosity. So that was really fascinating.
Yeah, no, I think when unschooling's going well, the child isn't having to think, the parents doing a lot of that work, like creating the environment, putting everything in place so that the child can just be free to be themselves and play and explore. So
yeah, exactly.
And the second point that I wanted to sort of like pick out was about partnership, and in terms of it's an important concept in attachment theory, the relationship between the parent and the child working in partnership together. And David writes, full understanding of attachment requires recognition that interaction between caregivers and babies is a two-way process. Parent and child respond to each other on the basis that each can predict the other's behaviour, as well as his or her own behaviour during that interaction. So they know that, through research studies, and we know through interactions with our own babies and children, that they're inherently social, and they, as soon as they're born, and says that they're looking to interact with the world around them, and they really very much want to interact with us on equal terms and in meaningful ways, and with both adults and children. And someone called Colwyn Trevarthen, he calls this purposeful intersubjectivity. And he's done some wonderful research looking at the relationship between mothers and babies from, very early age, how they have this wonderful dance between them, and they interact together. And he sort of talked about it in terms of like a musicality that they have between them, which kind of links into your idea about flow as well. And I think in some of his videos, you can really see the mum and baby in a state of flow together. And it's it's quite a moving thing to see. And of course, when you're in your own relationships with your own children and that happens, I think it does deepen your attachment relationships. And I feel it's sort of something that's so key to, the foundations of unschooling, because in unschooling, partnerships recognised as being something that's really an important way of being and interacting with our children. So we're working with them, sort of collaborating with them, helping them to achieve, meet their needs, achieve the goals that they want in ways that are meaningful to them. And I feel this really sort of like ties in well with that aspect of, like attachment and thinking about that interaction, and moving away really from more authoritarian approaches to parenting, or approaches that perhaps are more sort of permissive or stand back. It's kind of really saying, you can be engaged with your child and meet their needs in this kind of really wonderful sort of dance. So that's what.
Yeah, I love the idea of dance, because I've used it over the years to describe it, like the dance of parenting, because it's so much of understanding where your child is and what what their goals are, like what they're looking for, whether now will probably be a good time to step in and help a bit more actively, or maybe to give them a bit more time and space for what they're trying to do. And I love back to the point where, we're not always going to call it 100% of the time, right? But it's about they're comfortable saying, oops, no, please, I want to try this on my own. And we're comfortable saying, sure. It's that whole dance, right? Just making our best guess and not standing back and being afraid to interact, but, making our best guess and dancing with them till we find our footing. And yeah, when you hit that flow, it's really beautiful, isn't it?
Definitely. And something that comes through the attachment research is how important it is okay to get it wrong. You're going to make mistakes, and like you said, I think it's about 50% of the time that parents get it right, but babies are actually can be really understanding, and it's the parent taking responsibility to repair those sort of disconnections and ruptures, which is important. So it's not letting yourself become overwhelmed if you have a disconnection, but sort of thinking, I'm going to reach out to my child or to the baby, and I'm going to sort of make things okay, and then that's part of the dance. So, and that's an important part of the attachment relationship as well, and I think that's quite a sort of helpful and a hopeful thing to know. So, because I think a lot of people can feel, that if they can't get it right 100%, then they're not going to try. But, it's
yeah, exactly. That's why I thought it was so important to say that, because it's not so. And then we can also, in that strive for perfection, right? When something goes wrong, we can berate ourselves, which means we are even more fearful to try to come back and connect again, right? But we talk about apologizing. You say, oops, that's part of repairing that relationship. And the point is that, as adults, we're wanting to create this relationship with them so we can take that step, right? That's a repair that we want to do. So understanding that, you're not always going to get it right. And that's okay. And just keep trying, because every time you learn a little bit more, right? You learn when that didn't work. It's like, oh, well, I'm not going to try that next time. And next time, it's just another piece of information for us so that we can not step on their feet maybe as much next time.
Yeah, it's just getting to know each other.
Yeah, exactly.
Shall I go on to
part number 3? Yeah.
The next one was about maximizing joy. And I really think this is wonderful. And I know when I first heard it, I thought, this connects so much with unschooling, because I'll read the quote a minute. It just says, equally important in terms of children's early emotional development is the caregiver's recognition and enhancement of the infant's positive emotional states. The joy of play, the deep bliss and contentment of shared eye gaze, the fun of singing songs together, the pleasure experienced by both parent and child when a new skill is learned, give powerful boosts to the security of an infant's attachment. The positive emotions also help the brain to deal with stress and lay down rich neurological structures that enhance children's ability to think about feeling and regulate affect. And that's Alan Shaw, who's done a lot of work in this area. Sort of really, he's focused on how much, joy, the attachment relationship can help us sort of maximize joyful feelings. And this is really important in deepening our relationships and enabling our children to thrive. So the attachment isn't just about thinking about how we regulate or help our children to manage their sort of negative states, like fear or anxiety. But it's also really important to think about how we're actually creating an environment and relationships sort of full of joy. And I think this is something that unschooling sort of focuses on in a really very helpful way. So,
yeah, and, when I read that, I was like, yeah, because my website's Living Joyfully, right? Because that became, after spending so much time with my children when, they left school and we were all together and I was deschooling and figuring this stuff all out, joy became like, I could see how helpful that was, just in support of our relationships, in helping them, how that environment truly did help them feel more secure, feel more positive, support their learning better. It just supported life better, right? And yeah, and you know, it's not discounting the negative. Like you said, it's not about ignoring the negative. You are responding to those negative states, like we've been talking about before. But it's also that piece of going after and finding those joyful moments and creating those as well as often as you can, because it really does help children thrive, and it brings your attachment closer, right? You feel more connected with them because there's lots of fun things bubble up when you're in a joyful space.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah. And as he was in that quote you had about, you know, the deep bliss and contentment of shared eye gaze, fun of singing together. What popped up for me is we talk so much about time and the importance of time and space, really. Right. Just allowing these things to unfold naturally, instead of, you know, having in your mind, well, we got to do this and this and this. And that's, you know, my kids are older now, right? But I have found throughout all ages, you know, even now as young adults, having that space and time where there isn't pressure to do X, Y, Z within the certain time frame, because that's when those conversations can bubble up, right? Where you have a moment to share, you know, maybe it's not something that needs a solution, but something fun they found, you know, that they don't need to come to you to help them solve it, but it allows you to share that joy with them, the things that they're finding joyful for me to share. You know, I just this afternoon, I was having a conversation with Joseph in the kitchen where he shared some really fun stuff that he's found in the last few days. And, you know, just giving that time, making that space for these things to bubble up really helps bring the joy into it as well. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
You want to go on to the next one?
I can do. I was just going to say, I just think it's great how, in terms of unschooling, you know, like in thinking about things like joy, which some people think, oh, it kind of sounds like a frivolous idea, but it's actually underpinned by science, if you see what I mean, if that's in some way helpful. I know science another narrative, but it's interesting that people are actually actively looking at this and researching it and sort of actually seeing the benefits, you know, in different areas other than just, you know, like in unschooling. So.
Yeah, that's why I love this book that you brought, you know, and suggested, because it is interesting to see that there is research going on and that is finding so much of what we see through our lens of unschooling, right? In these relationships, all these different things that we're talking about really are well connected, strongly connected with what we're actually seeing in real life with unschooling, right?
And a bit that you just mentioned ties in, perhaps. I know that you've written an article called "Thinking About Thinking," and the next bit that I think you touched on some of those ideas that you talk about in there. You know, about having the space and time to let unschooling fold and relationships unfold. And the last point in this I was going to pick up on was about mentalization and mind-mindedness, and just how it's the idea that in a relationship we can help our children by recognizing them as individuals with, you know, their own unique internal worlds to develop those capacities within themselves, which enables them to sort of step back and reflect on their experiences, and enables them to really take a different relationship to, you know, things that happen in their lives, and to manage stress and just thinking about their emotional world in a different way, which was another key area of attachment theory, which is part of having, you know, like can be part of having in a secure attachment. So that was the last bit really on that section. That's really important too, right? Because you're helping them. You're also helping them you're giving them words, right? Of especially when they're younger. You're helping them identify, you know, maybe the feelings and where maybe they're coming from. You're helping them make these connections so that they're able to better understand or even explain
when you're having conversations with them. It gives them more of a perspective, a way to visualize it that they can, explain to you as a parent so that you can help them as they're moving through it. And, when we were talking about the insecure attachments, that is sometimes something that's missing, right? That a parent isn't yet able to really understand that they're just kind of blown away and, feel hit when things happen in relationships. They don't quite know how to sort it out and analyze it and build a picture, a coherent picture about what's going on, right? Yeah. So that was really, really interesting. Yeah. I talk a lot about kind of being able to analyze situations. So it's not just about the facts of the situations, right? It's also the emotions that we're feeling and maybe why we're being triggered this way and that. And the work to be able to understand that helps us figure out a path forward eventually, right? Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so I'm going to take on something that another piece. There was lots that I found really interesting in the book. But in part 3, David visits the question of how much of a role individual temperament plays in the development of different attachment patterns versus just being the result of variations in the quality of the parenting, right? So this was really kind of a question of the interaction between nature and nurture. So we're going to start with how David defines temperament, so we can all start at the same place. He defines it as the variety of individual differences and personality traits that seem to characterize each of us as we engage with life. So we naturally differ in terms of our fearfulness, our sensitivity, our sociability, like introverts and extroverts, our emotionality, etc. And temperament is seen as heavily influenced by our genes. And fear and many anxiety-related traits do appear to be influenced by heritability, right? So where fear compels us to escape from danger and attachment propels us to seek protection, through our range of temperament, there will be natural variations in our fearfulness, which in turn will impact our caregiving. So, because in part 3, he's talking about some of the questions. So some critics of attachment theory maintain that each attachment pattern is little more than children displaying their natural temperamental makeup, that they simply vary in their biological susceptibility to distress and their ability to regulate it, meaning that the quality of the caregiving has little to do with it. So David goes on to explain that most researchers now agree that there is likely to be a complex relationship between temperament and attachment, particularly with insecure attachments. And this makes total sense because the mom of a child with a more challenging temperament, so that's the classic, quote, difficult child, or in less judgmental terms, highly sensitive or spirited child. I have read all 3 of those books. That mom can find themselves needing to spend more time and effort in that caregiving role, right? To help their child feel supported and secure, because their fear and anxiety and hence their attachment behaviors are triggered more often, right? So David explains that even if a child has a naturally difficult temperament, but is parented by a relatively stress-free, autonomous, attuned mother who enjoys extensive spousal and family support, that child is likely to be securely attached. And I loved his point about spousal and family support, because if a child is needing active and regular support from their mom, her ability to do that can be compromised if there are additional challenges in her environment, right? Like an unsupportive partner or financial worries, or they're not nearby other family who might be able to help them out. Or, when you've got add unschooling to the mix, you can be surrounded by people who don't understand your choice to unschool, or even, conventional parenting that doesn't understand really our child's challenges and our choice to fully support them by consistently responding to their attachment behaviors, whereas they think, oh, they're spoiled, they need to learn how to deal with it by themselves, right? Meaning that their fear and anxiety and the ways that in the way that helps them. So to continue to be that secure base for them, no matter their age and no matter what kind of looks we're getting or comments we're getting that they're too old for XYZ. But in those situations, it's definitely not impossible for the mom. But I do think recognizing those different challenges that she has on her plate and how they weave together can go a long way, just for understanding, right? Just so that they understand that they've got a lot on their plate and what those challenges are. When even when I know I've got lots on my plate, at least acknowledging it and understanding that, yeah, this can be hard sometimes, just helps me get to a clearer state of mind and remember why I'm doing this, right? Mm-hmm. It gets me back to, okay, yeah, I am choosing X, Y, and Z because they're important to me. And yeah, this is hard, but that's why I did it. And it just helps, get me settled again. David summarized the research by saying that although children's genes and temperament do play a role in the parent-child relationship, the quality of caregiving appears to have the largest effect on children's attachment organization, at least in the early years. And then, of course, out pops that early years constraint that he's talking about. It was really interesting. I loved his point that as a child gets older and enters adolescence and adulthood, they may have more control over their choice of relationships and the environment. And he writes that this growing freedom provides more opportunities for the individual's interests, inclinations, and predispositions, many governed by genes, to express themselves free of parental constraint. So research seems to show that as temperament gradually starts to have a greater influence on adult personality and behavior, attachment organization continues to have an important but independent effect. So I love looking at that through the lens of unschooling, because as parents, we are supporting our children's exploration of their temperament and personality right from the get-go. So our kids don't need to figure out who they really are as a person away from parental constraint, right? Mm-hmm. In adolescence and young adulthood, they already have that firm foundation of self. Mm-hmm. And they're continuing to learn about themselves as they explore new environments, right? Within when they're ready, when they're comfortable, because they know already that they grow and change as a person over time, because we haven't tried to keep them in this mold. Mm-hmm. Their entire childhood, right? So they've seen as their temperament can change over time, right? So maybe they're fearful much longer than most kids, but eventually they start to understand it enough and figure out the tools to manage it for themselves, that it becomes much less of an issue over time. Mm-hmm. All sorts of things, even, extrovert, introvert kind of swings over time as well. So there's so many benefits to living an unschooling lifestyle that help our kids learn this stuff. They don't have to wait until they're old enough to kind of get away from their parents to figure out who they really are. Mm-hmm. So as our attachment organization, so our strong and connected relationships will continue, and our children are confident still as they go out in the world that we will always be available to help them when they find themselves fearful or just in need of support for something. So it's fascinating for me to see that shift in primary attachment as as my kids are getting older, right? And they start to develop close relationships with partners, and how, their partner becomes their first level of support when challenges arise, and when they're seeking that connection, support, comfort. And then I'm the next level if they find they need more feedback or help, or just want, more camaraderie, compassion, etc., just more feedback in general. So it's been really interesting to me to see how those attachment behaviors and needs kind of just expand out into the world as they get older too.
And I think it's so interesting as well how each relationship is unique. So, you picked up about sort of the temperament and the interaction between sort of our caregiving and the environment and our individual children's sort of personalities emerging. And I think it's really interesting how they are emerging in relationship to us, in the early years and also throughout adolescence. And I think taking that partnership-based approach means that we are, we're engaging in that dance, so giving them space when they need space, engaging when they want that support, and providing that secure base for them. So it isn't, like you say, they don't have to feel that they have to wait till a certain time or a certain age where they have their freedom and independence, because it's been part of their lives from since they were babies, really. It's something that they've grown up with. And it's an organic process that really is that Trevathan calls, the intersubjectivity, that's happening all the time. So, yeah, no, I really liked how you sort of mentioned, about how those different sort of factors impact on.
Yeah, and the way you described that reminded me, like I talked about it in my talk, A Family of Individuals. It's not like the whole concept of fairness, right? Or sameness. So it's not me doing these caregiving behaviors and doing them the same for each of my children, right? Because they're different. They have different temperaments and personalities and needs and stuff. So those relationships are totally individual with each of them. And the kinds of things that I do can be helpful in one relationship, but if I did that with another child, it would not be as helpful.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great, because when we talk about secure attachments in general, and that we're striving for, but realizing that what that entails inside the relationship is that dance that you're figuring out with each of them individually. Very, very, very interesting. So before we go, is there anything else that you would like to bring up around the book?
Well, I guess.
Or did we hit most of it?
I think we've covered quite a bit of it. I mean, I wanted to just maybe emphasize the part, for people that may be listening, about if you do feel that you have concerns, if your child has, like maybe you don't feel they've got a secure attachment, that you can do something about that you can, work towards your own, work through your own experiences and develop your own secure attachment. And Dan Siegel, he talks about this quite a bit in some of his books that he's written, and also Kim Golding, who's a UK psychologist. She's written a book called Creating Loving Attachments, and the approach that she advocates, I feel, is very similar to an unschooling sort of approach, where it's called, playful acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, and like avoiding punishments, and just really collaborating and partnering your children are all helpful ways that you can start to build those secure relationships if you haven't done it already. And I think it's really important to know that it is never too late. Even if throughout childhood, throughout adolescence, or even as an adult, you can always work and create those sort of secure relationships if you can find access to, like a therapist that you trust, or perhaps like just if you are in a relationship with a person who has a secure attachment, research has suggested, that there's some flexibility and you can change things. So, and maybe I'd just like to add a little bit, because I recently did some training in September in London, which was all about focusing on nurturing attachments between children and parents, which is called Theraplay. And it's all about like fostering that connection in a joyful way, and which again I think fits really well with unschooling, and is really really fits with children from young children right through to teens can sort of do this. So it's something you can take the ideas for yourself, and there's videos on YouTube about various sort of Theraplay activities that you can engage in with your children, or you could access Theraplay. I know that there's Theraplay therapists, different countries around the world, but I think there's a lot there, so you don't have to feel that you can't develop a secure attachment. It's always possible, and it's never too late, I guess.
That is an awesome point. Yeah, because you don't want people we don't want people to go away from the discussion at all feeling bad, right? It may be, it's like, we wanted to give them a deeper understanding of how these relationships, how these behaviors are related to how you're relating to each other, and how you can learn more about it, and you can change, earn secure attachment, etc. So that's great that you have those resources, and I will for sure put them in the show notes.
Cool.
Cool. Yay. Well, Thank you so much again for recommending the book. And it's just so, I know we spend so many hours diving into it, but I really appreciate you taking the time because it's really awesome. I love it. And I hope people listening have enjoyed and gotten something out of it as well. So it's evening for you now. I hope you have a great one.
Okay. Thanks, Pam. Speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Bye. Thanks for listening. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes at livingjoyfully.ca/podcast. While you're there, be sure to check out the third book in my Living Joyfully with Unschooling series, Life Through the Lens of Unschooling. This book is a wide array of essays drawn from my blog that shed light on the day-to-day lives of unschooling families. You'll find essays tackling everything from learning to read to visiting relatives, all organized around 9 keywords that have been woven into the fabric of our unschooling lives. Deschooling, learning, days, parenting, relationships, family, lifestyle, unconventional, and perspective. The theme is life, the lens, unschooling. Until next time, have fun living and learning with your family.